tonight to a monthly meeting of the Cairo Historical Society. It's always great to have new faces and see the different things that we're working on. Tonight, excuse me, just had a brain, but the topic for this evening is collecting old bottles with a focus on Greene County, and in my case specifically Cairo, New York, since that's my hometown, and that may as well be where I start, since that's what got this whole crazy thing going. Was back in 1981, we were on a cross-country trip actually, and we had just come back, and we were visiting a good family friend, Barbara Antonelli, and she was in the process of cleaning out her basement, and she had a box of old bottles. She had been a long-time digger. She and her girlfriends would go to the local resorts and find all sorts of wonderful bottles, especially at that time, back in the 50s and 60s when they were first unearthing them. And so one of the bottles that she gave me in this little box was a Clark Stanley snake oil liniment. And I just thought that had such a great old-time ring to it as a proprietary medicine. The other one that appealed to me was a simple blob-style Jacobs, of which I have some examples here tonight. A little bigger than that, probably a quart. But the fact that it had my hometown on it appealed to me, and that kind of lit the spark for collecting local things. And all these years later, it's blossomed into, and this is just a portion of the local collection, what you see today. Now, the Webster definition of a bottle is a container, usually of glass, with a narrow neck and usually no handles. And I thought about that, and that does make perfect sense, because once you put handles on things, they're more meant for dispensing something else, perhaps syrup or something, but you don't have a syrup bottle, you have a syrup jug or a pitcher, and lots of other versions of that variation on the definition. But for our purposes, most of the ones you see don't have handles. So now for the local definition of bottles, I like to think of anything that was meant as a container for a product that was going to be used in a Greene County town. So often they'll be embossed with the name right on them. Jacobs again, Cairo. We have many other towns from Greene County represented: Leeds, East Durham, Catskill, all sorts of examples. Now, the types of products that these bottles contain varies greatly, but in our area, it tends to be beers, sodas, mineral waters, many medicines, like most towns would have. But and it seemed to be that the closer you were to the river, or the higher your population, would tend to affect the number of proprietors you might have. And it works different for different types of things. Like for milk, for example, you might see more dairy bottles out in the rural areas where there was more grazing and more dairy cows. But then closer to places like Catskill and the other river towns, maybe not quite as many, but it varied. But so it always makes it fun and different no matter what town you're from. If that's your thing, collecting geographically, then you're going to go and find your story for your town, and that's what happened to me. I wound up focusing on Cairo, not only because I had been born here, but it just so happened my family had a business right next door to the bottling works that I wasn't aware of as a youngster, but then later in life, I would make quite a few connections with both that building and with people associated to it. In fact, I had the opportunity to interview James Leroy Jacobs' younger brother, Frank Granger Jacobs, when he was in his 90s. And in fact, he passed away 4 months later after I had interviewed him up at a nursing home in Albany. But he gave me some invaluable information about having worked at the bottling works as a kid, and ironically, I was able to dig some of the very spots where he used to toss the empties out with his dad. So that was kind of nice connection to make. And that brings me back to one of the reasons we collect is that connectedness, that because most people would say, what the heck are you collecting empty bottles for? You know, they have nothing in them, they're useless, but it's so much more than that. It can be the age, it can be the color, the form, unusual embossing. Some people collect just those. We've got a few examples of there's a bottle with a soda jerk on it. Some people like patriotic themes. There's an eagle on a little whiskey bottle from probably the 1880s. Some people love paper labels, especially on medicines, but you can find household labels. We've got a few different examples of those. There's just, my gosh, there's so many varieties of ways that you can get involved in bottles. That's one of the beauties of the hobby is your approach, and it may have to do with budget, it may have to do with time constraints, but anybody can build a nice little bottle collection, from scratch, even in today's age. I mean, certainly the internet came along and that changed the picture drastically, because people like my good friend Barb, who used to be able to just get permission from farmers and resort owners and go dig them right up. Those days are fewer and far between. There's still things out there, but you've got to work a lot harder to find them now as compared to then. One of the other things I did want to hit on, just getting back to, for every individual bottle, it always has a story, and part of that story can be not only where it was found and what it is, but the fact that now that you've come across it, you become part of that bottle's story. I had a good friend who wrote an article about a beautiful green Saratoga bottle that he found along a stream while he was fishing, Richie Obach. And he got that article published in Catskill Life magazine, and he really did a nice job with it. But he told the story from the perspective of the bottle, having laid there all those years and all the things it had seen in that time span. So there's so many ways that you can approach the hobby and how you interpret the things that you find, but that just makes it even more interesting. Now, I think what I'll do, since what I brought tonight included both local here in Cairo, Greene County, and some general, I think what I'm going to do is just briefly tell the Cairo bottling story, and then we'll kind of branch out from there. Yeah, I got my little cheat sheet here for dates, but generally I often at these talks let the bottles speak for themselves, because they always have for me, and why stop now? So the one that started it all, and ironically this one I also got from Barb later on in life. She had a beautiful collection, and she had always wanted to pass on most of it to her kids, which she did in part, but she was good enough to sell me a pile that included one of these, and I don't want to hold it up too long in case I slip and drop it, because there's only about 3 or 4 of them known. And but what's important about it on several fronts it's an unusual bottle because it's atypical from the usual blob tops of the day that you see. It's kind of a hybrid of this skinny neck and this cylindrical body. It has the typical round slug plate, but the name is especially important. Walter's Brothers, Cairo, New York, and they bottled mineral water and from the same spring that ultimately Jacobs would draw from. And these bottles were only produced in 1 year, 1879, because evidently he attempted the business, but he and his brother were so busy with their hotel right here in town, in fact, not far from where we're standing, because it was a very active hotel and provided a lot of other services besides rooms. And but at that time, both brothers were especially active even beyond their businesses and politics and other affairs. So ultimately they sold to Jacobs in 1880. So from 80 to 1899, you'll see a whole variety of Jacobs bottles, and several of which are experimental types, we've been calling them. And this particular one, gotta hold it the right way, but there's a black marble inside that starts out at the top, and the pressure of the contents, I believe CO2, would keep that top, or that marble on the top, and then to release that top, you would push the marble in, and it would make a pop sound. And it's been said that that may be where the term pop bottle came from. But on this one, they ingeniously molded in two little ridges so that as you tilted it, the marble would stay at the bottom and not interfere with the pouring action. So that was a neat innovation for that period. And then there's a few others that are similar. Actually, this one's a little more similar, but it's a little harder to find. This is the about 1880 to 85, but a Jacobs with just a simple name on it. You hardly ever find them perfect, but they always have what's called caseware on the bottom from being put inside the little sections of a wooden crate. And for some reason that one they just didn't produce as many. Perhaps it was done earlier. Here's the third one. This one has several patent dates around the bottom, and again, they're hard to find perfect because that natural wear wears down the high embossing, and so you just never find them mint. But they're probably out there somewhere. And all in all, there's probably 19 different varieties of Jacobs bottles, but I don't have them all here tonight, but that would include variations of seltzers, of what are called Hutchinson style bottles with this type of top, and they would have a ceramic stopper in them. I have one somewhere here that was all set up. Let's see.
Sylvia's got one on the table.
Anyway, there was one with the other, well, yeah, that's the ceramic bale, and that's all right. I was also looking for a hutch that had, oh, there we go, there's a loop seal, that's called. And that one you would also push in, so that one may have also made a pop sound at one time, but, and then there were also errors in embossing. I did want to mention that. That was these. Now there's one that spelled the name Cairo wrong, C-A-R-I-O, Cario. So there's a few of those around. It's actually fairly abundant. And then, this one, no, that's not one. I didn't bring all three, but there's at least three of them. There's one with an L that has a little tail on it that's backwards, and then there's the corrected version. And then the third one, oh rats, what's the third one? Oh, now I'm forgetting. Yeah, there's the L, the Cairo, and I forget what the third one is, but anyway, it's been a while since I did this dog. So anyway, there's also some nice color variations. I mean, for a small town, we're generally only producing things in clear, aqua, and some amber, but not too many exotic colors. But every once in a while, you'll see an oddball slip through. That's like an apple green color, which is a nice variation for a Jacobs. And yeah, amber, but yeah, everything else is pretty straightforward, but once in a while. And then you'll also see just nice glass. I mean, the way that one cooled in the mold just has some beautiful striations to it. This one has what looks like a crack, but it isn't. It's just a mold drip, they would call that, where it sagged in that one spot. But it cleaned up beautifully. And here's kind of an interesting one. A Jacobs Steam Bottling Works, and that one represents a change in the technology for cleaning their bottles, that steam-driven machine, and I'm pretty sure they bought that around 1892. So when you see that one with that term on it, steam bottling, you can date that one pretty closely.
So how would they produce these bottles?
These were actually made mostly in New York City, and they'd be made in a mold. I don't think we have any, there's no free-blown Cairo bottles that I'm aware of, that say Cairo on them. But there's, let's see, and some of them, once they invented the crown top in 1891, you'll start to see what's called an applied crown, because it's an applied top bottle, but with a crown top as opposed to a blobby top. And we're a little behind the times, so this is George M. White, so he's in there about 1911 to 22. But there, and it's easy to spot it, because you can see the seam on the bottom fade out, and then it's kind of tooled so that finishes it off. And then eventually, probably around the 30s, you start to get into a purely machine-made bottle in 2 halves, by the, let's see, I think it was the Owens Company that made the bottle machine that they used. There's actually a commercial short film on the process that's sitting up in the Albany Museum that Jim Bartman Sr. donated, that he found in the bottling works when he bought it in '77. And unfortunately, it's in deep freeze, and I'd always hoped to see if we could solicit them to allow us to make a copy, so at least the town people could see that, or people in general, but because, I mean, yes, they preserved it, but nobody gets to see it. So that's another project if you want to get someone working on it. Okay, so I've already mentioned George White. He's the fellow that bought from Jacobs. So he was there from 11 to 22. And then in the 20s, the De Benedetto brothers and others formed a partnership, and they bought out White, and they kept calling it White's Bottling Works, but they used this pedal design, we like to call it. I think there's at least 3 versions of this. One of them says Deep Rock Mineral Water, and then others have variations on that theme. And let's see, then in the mid-30s, a fellow named Tom Siciliano came along, and he kept the same bottle as well, but he changed the name of the company to Catskill Mountain Beverages. And some nice colorful emissions came out during that period, which include, it's like a big version of that same bottle without the pedals, but, and they would reuse them for different products. This one's for birch beer, but has a nice Art Deco label from the 30s, and with Rip Van Winkle on it. And I just happen to have a photo of a bunch of cases of those sitting in front of a local department store. Okay, then the 40s rolled along, and oh gosh, unfortunately I didn't bring Clico Club stuff because I just plain ran out of room. But, oh, have we got one handy?
Two.
Oh, there's one, look at that. And yeah, it has the famous Eskimo boy on it. And it turns out that we used to bottle Clico Club here in the 30s, I believe, and then eventually they just bought the company out because they were small and not as competitive. And but yeah, that's what's called a pyro glazed label. So that's on there permanent. And yeah, there's one of the other ones where it says on the back, it says on the front Clico Club, but on the back, Catskill Mountain Beverages. So you can always date one from that.
It has the Eskimo on it too.
Yeah. And we also produced some nifty products, or I should say they bottled some neat things, one at a time. Whistle was one. That was an orange flavored drink, supposed to be called the liquid food. So that was like the early nutrition of the day. And they're embossed on the bottom, Cairo, because there are lots of other ones that aren't. You can always tell the Cairo ones. And then here's kind of a neat little side story. It's the typical green tinted hobble skirt Coca-Cola bottle, but then it has the date, Christmas Day, 1923 for a patent. And supposedly it was just kind of a goof that they decided to choose that day for that patent of this design. But you know, these are marked Cairo, and they have them from many other towns. So that in itself isn't a big deal. But it turned out that unfortunately, the De Benedetto boys kind of infringed on the agreement with Coca-Cola, and supposedly it wasn't that they tampered with the formula, but I think it had more to do with distribution. They were selling it in places where they weren't authorized to sell it, because at that time they had kind of general territories mapped out, you know, not on a regular map, but just kind of a gentleman's agreement. And so I have letters in the, in this one, that refer to Coca-Cola asking for their bottles back, basically. So that may have caused the smaller number of the Cairo Christmas Cokes as opposed to other towns. And then, so we get into the 50s and 60s, Clico Club keeps rolling on, but eventually the other big companies start getting bigger and bigger, and just, you know, at some point make these small town bottlers just inefficient to the point where they couldn't survive. And that was kind of the period that I came in as far as, you know, knowing of anything about some of the local products that had been produced, even though I wasn't collecting, because I remember going behind the bottling works and the old delivery trucks were still sitting there, and to show how things have changed, we used to play on the trucks and hang onto the door and swing around. And, you know, so needless to say, nowadays there'd be fences up or signs or whatever. So the world has changed considerably, but those were fun times to be sure. And but since then the place has changed hands many times, but finally it's come full circle, and today, ironically, it's a brew pub of all things. And so it's been totally renovated, and in fact we had dinner there about a month ago and had a great time, and had some great craft beer and good food. And they even have one of the doors from those old delivery trucks hanging on the wall with the advertising painted on it. So they're getting real creative and reuses of these great old places. And afterwards, feel free to look at the literature, because we have several images of that building in various states, both before the present building was built, which was 28, and I don't have anything recently of the new renovations yet, but I'll be talking to the new folks soon. Well, I'll tell you what, I think I'm gonna cut it a little short. I had a little case of bronchitis earlier in the week, so I'm gonna try and keep the mileage down on it.
Can you take some questions?
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, where to begin?
Yeah.
Which one is your favorite bottle that you do have?
Ooh, that's a tough one. But I do have, because bottle collecting, I will admit, it does have its competitiveness built in. And a bottle that I was always fond of coming across. Well, actually, you know what? No, you don't know. Believe it or not, it's gonna be, well, one of is definitely this flask. Even though as historical flasks go, this is a pretty common one. It's probably 1830s, it was blown. It's called a, let's see, now this one is the cornucopia on one side and an urn on the other. And it's probably like slight yellow amber, maybe olive amber, sheared lip, slightly flared. You know, it's got beautiful form to it. Even though it's blown in a mold, but it's got the pontil scar from blowing it with a pipe. But what's great is the story behind this one. This was found in that bluestone mine that I was telling you about earlier. And it was one of those evenings where it's just starting to get dark, and I had found a few low-end things, but I was in the pit and probably about waist high, and this was laying on its side, and I, just kind of pulled it out, and I kind of felt it because it was getting so dark I couldn't really see what it was, and I said, darn, I know what this feels like, and but I'm gonna just wrap it up, put it in the bag, and wait till I get back to the car to figure out what it was, and sure enough, it was this, and it was perfect.
Wow.
And what preserved it was that it was laying on its side, and half of the cork was still in the neck, and the contents, of course, was booze, which got some alcohol in it, so it never froze. So the combination of it being on its side and not tilted up, where water could get in and freeze and crack it, because it's just one of those things that you just don't dig historical flasks because they were always an attractive bottle. People tended to keep them longer and not throw them out, especially here in the country. You'll find broken pieces of them in earlier privies, outhouse dumps,
Yeah.
but usually in more populated areas. But to find one around here is pretty unusual.
That's
And
incredible.
and again, value, they've gone up slightly over the years. It's probably like an $80 flask today, but that was just that was a treat, because it's just something that for local diggers you don't come across. So that would probably be. But while I'm in the case, for a different reason, this one didn't require much digging at all. My daughter and I were on a quick hike behind the house, and it was a sunny day like today, and this was laying, just in a little bit of ground with just the shoulder was popping out, and the way the sun had hit it while we were walking by, I saw a glint of glass, and I popped this out. It's probably an 1840s graphite panel mineral water. And again, as these go, it's not a rare one, pretty common, but beautiful teal color. But I just wrote a little note to go along with it, found by Laura and Dad on April 27th, 1997, in the woods behind our house. So that one has a lot of meaning for me. Yep. And now she's grown up and married.
Oh.
But not much time for digging anymore.
What's the ceramic one?
On the end here?
Right in the middle.
Oh, this one. Yeah, actually, that's a neat little story. That's a Searing's beer. They made what's called Armacetta beer, right in Durham. And this dates from 1867 to 74. And I didn't know at the time that we even had a brewery in Durham, but I got some good information from the Durham Center Museum, and I was able to narrow it down. And this is actually an oddball for them because most of theirs are, well, that's a fairly dark glaze, but they're even darker. You can barely read the names on most of them. And then once in a blue moon, you'll see a light one. But they're getting harder to come by. And now actually, you just reminded me with all this personal stuff, every once in a while you'll find a bottle that, again, isn't that much of a big deal by itself, but this one came with a note. It says, Mrs. Anna Stark, Cairo by Church, 10/4/83 for RRR. Oh, I know, oh, that's probably Mrs. Rapp, because I got this up on 9W after Leah Rapp's place had been sold. She had a shop there in Athens, right on that, just before the Leeds Athens Road, I believe. Anyway, it's a Frederick Loser Pure Cologne, and it turns out Mrs. Stark worked for that company. And it also turned out that we wound up buying Mrs. Stark's house
Oh, wow.
in Cairo,
Oh.
because it turns out they were both Lutheran church members, and Leah Rapp used to come down and go to all the local rummage sales and see all her other Lutheran friends, and so it's just amazing that I would wind up with this bottle all these years later. And that was just totally on a whim. I was coming back from Albany, and the new folks that bought it, she was starting to get ready for a little yard sale, and I, inquired, and in fact, she wasn't even there, actually. I left a note. I made a little pile, and I left a note on the pile and told her to call my cell phone, and that started a whole string of, because it turns out Leah Rapp had a massive bottle collection, and there were, three of these, I believe, that little tiny one. Oh, and this one, with the nice, probably silver overlay. But Leah Rapp was fanatic about putting notes on all of her bottles, either where she got it or what number it was. So a few of these might still have stickers on them. Oh yeah, that one's got one. Number 721. So she would number her bottle collection. But yeah, about the same time, 1983, which makes sense because that's when we bought the house. So Mrs. Stark was probably discarding some of the things she couldn't take with her down to New Jersey, where she wound up moving. But yeah.
So what's your oldest bottle?
Ooh, well, for today, now it's going to be a close call. This one actually might do double duty. This is probably the oldest and the smallest. It's a little vial, and I got this from a fellow named Harold Schneidmuller, excuse me. Now, I guess I already ruined the story because I told you his name, but at any rate, he found this at an undisclosed location up in, well, let's just say the North Country. But the thing about it is it's probably has something to do with the Revolutionary War because of where he found it. And he may have gone off trail just slightly, may have lost his bearings or something. And let's just say it may have had something to do with a very important battle in American history. but it's probably a little ink vial or possibly medicine. But who knows? That little guy could have dipped a quill in there and wrote some wonderful letter back home. So that's the other part. You always like to fantasize about, what this bottle was through.
It could have been Horatio Gates, it could have been Burgoyne, it could have been Benedict Arnold.
Now this
Who
one
knows?
we're pretty sure is an English porter between 1740 and 1770. It's got that nice tapered long neck with like a string top. And again, they're beautiful. I mean, it's a piece of art. This one is free blown, because I don't even think they molded the bottom part. They just spun it. And once you were good enough at it, you could turn a bottle on a pipe, you could get that cylindrical effect. Now, although, here's another close one. This is either a trine or, let's see, possibly lignum vitae, but it is a bottle, and it's all turned in one piece but hollowed out, and they're better craftsmen than I am, because I could never do that.
What's a lignum vitae?
Oh, it's a very, very hard wood, hardest wood on earth, supposedly. And
Where did you find that?
this one I didn't dig. This actually belongs to a friend of mine. This is a loaner. It is for sale though. But yeah, he gave me a grouping of lignum vitae that he believed to be, and but they're nice. They got beautiful, not only the form but the variations in the patterns of the wood that you get.
Is that a decorative piece, or did it actually hold something?
Oh, it functioned, yeah.
What would have been in there?
Probably spirits, yeah, probably a little, I think it's probably 18th century. Could be late 18th, but.
So I see you got 2 soda spritzer bottles up there.
We do, we have a couple of, and this one, oh yeah, now that one you can date because it has the R.E. Jacobs top, which is for Rufus E. Jacobs. So we know that that's after they had the fire in 1899, which happened to be the same year that he, Senior, died. And Rufus was there for a while, but again, had a little problem and lost his title. Yeah. And then the other one, this one actually is really hard to find. That's why I bothered to go ahead and obtain it, even though it had a ding and a crack, and because you just don't find an Amos Post in amber like that. I see plenty of them in clear, but I've never seen one. So, and that's a generally good rule of thumb to follow, is if you haven't seen something that you collect in 20 or 30 years, it's probably a good idea to grab it when you can. Oh yeah, this one has a little story. I mean, not that this particular bottle is connected to this incident, but it's from the place that this took place at. This note says, Supreme Court versus Egbert Palmer, accused of shooting and wounding Ira Gray at the saloon of Hollenbeck Brothers, October 2nd, 1885, Catskill. And this is a Hollenbeck Brothers flask. Well, what's also unusual about it is it's a pint size, and it's what's called a strap side with these flat seams. Well, it's actually the seam plus a raised panel to make it look like a big wide strap. But yeah, they're fairly common, but this particular one with that slug plate is pretty tough to find. And the top is even a little crooked, just to add a little style to it. While we're on the subject of booze, this I had picked up at auction years ago up in Coxsackie, and I've seen this many times with that generic label, And this one, somebody went to the trouble of putting a label on it, on the back, that said, Applejack made by the Legs Diamond Gang in the Catskills about 1930. Now, whether or not that's fact or fiction, you know,
It's a great story.
but, let's see. Now, speaking of, well, this one's actually a medicine, but, I just thought I'd grab that one because there aren't too many earlier embossed Greene County bottles that are open paneled, you know, that are identified. And this is one of the older ones, Wing and Sisson in Coxsackie. And now this bottle over the years has just gotten harder to find because I think they're staying in collections and they're not circulating. I do have in the notebook an almanac from this company, and you're welcome to check that out. I mean, there's just so many great little examples of side stories and things. There's an 1880s mineral water from Catskill by Myers and Abele, and it has a nice embossing of Rip Van Winkle on it, waking from his nap.
Well, that begs the question, Bob, when you find a lot of these bottles, they kind of are dirty on the inside from, you know, either being in the dirt or whatever. How do you clean that?
Well, the very first thing is just to keep it simple and just good old warm soap and water and, you know, let it soak in there overnight and just see what comes out first. You know, usually that's going to be just dirt. But if it definitely has mineral staining, let's see if I got an example. I tried to bring clean ones, but
I think there's lots over here.
well, I mean, if it's really bad to the point where you see a rainbow on it,
They're decent ones. What about
yeah.
that front one, right by the ceramic one?
let's see.
Does that show?
Oh, yeah, there's a good example. Now that one, yeah, that's kind of borderline. That one, somebody might actually pay to have that cleaned because this is a Betterly from New Baltimore, and you just don't see this one very often. But it'd be a close call because it would probably cost about $15 to have it cleaned. I mean, in nice clean condition, it's worth more than that in today's market. Got what's called a tombstone hutch because it's shaped like a tombstone and with the embossing inside. But yeah, that one as a Greene County bottle is hard to find, but yeah, that would need to be tumbled professionally where they'd put it in a little drum. They would, you know, close it up. They'd fill it with probably half solution of fine, what do they call it, shavings. Some people use copper shavings and things like that. But whatever they're using, it's good because it works. There's a fellow out in Ware, Massachusetts, who I've been taking mine to, and it's worth the trip because, boy, he does a nice job, and he'll make it sparkle. I don't think I have anything here that he's cleaned, but I had bought a collection that had some really strong highlights that definitely needed to be cleaned up, and I spent $300 on the cleaning, but one bottle sold for about $600. So in that case, it was a good investment. So, but they were very high-end bottles. But and that doesn't happen very often, believe me. And I've had to humble myself many times more recently with all the competition now that's cropped up between eBay and these specialized glass auctions. I mean, they're both the best and the worst because they're the best if you just want to find information about what's great, what's rare, what's selling for tons of money. But if you're trying to build a collection of flasks or bitters or anything that has great age and color and form, it's really tough nowadays. You got to have a good sized checkbook. But it's encouraging though because I mean, I started a while ago, but you can definitely build a collection that will, you know, keep your interest going, keep you motivated, and yet still not have to break the bank, you know. Like me and your family who collected kind of geographically, you know, it limits things, but it has so much more, you know, meaning for you. And plus, some of us, I mean, we've had that connectedness and that passion for so long that it just doesn't go out of you. I mean, you kind of never get tired of them. You know, when you think, oh, I've been doing this so long, I should get out of it. But then you find something you haven't seen before and you just get right back into it, so.
So one of the questions is that Nat here has a two beautiful Jacobs purple bottles.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, is there something in the process that creates the purple?
Well,
Versus the
I
clear.
did mention to you that, you know, go for it if you can, but to be 100% honest, they didn't produce them in those colors originally, but it's usually done by putting them in a light box or irradiating them in some way, because they're made at a time when, let's see if I got one that's just starting. Let's see. Well, here's one that's kind of medium. Yeah, now that bottle starts out clear, but because it was made with manganese in the batch, the sunlight reacts with that, and it turns it more and more purple the more, you know, focused the rays are.
Ah.
And, you know, there are unscrupulous people out there who are selling some of these, not just those, all sorts of bottles from that period. Usually around 1915-ish was when they were using those batches, or that material in the batch.
I've heard
So,
if you take like normal bottles like that are already starting to change too, it's a good sign. But if you leave them in your window, apparently they'll get darker. If you have a very
Oh, yeah,
sunny
yeah.
spot,
yeah, that's what I mean. That will become more like that
keep doing it.
eventually,
Yeah, keep
so.
doing it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you're okay with it being as purple as it can be.
Well, I have two of them.
There you go.
We should try and build one of the microwaves. Just like see what we could cook up.
Well, see, it depends, because,
Not your good one.
see, I wouldn't mind having one, you know, just to show how far it can go, but I don't wanna change too many of the ones that I find from the way I found them. But I'm just kind of a purist in that sense.
No, we had found one, and I'm pretty sure you were with me. You know, John Wynn
Oh,
was
that's
at the mill, and it was in the rock wall. And as we took it out, the one end was purple, but the part that was tucked in was clear.
there we go, yeah.
But it probably been sitting in that rock wall for 100+ years, with just the neck sticking out.
So one question about Cairo is that you have a lot of Jacobs and White's Bottling Works. Was there anybody else that was producing bottles, embossed bottles in Cairo?
Well, the ones I mentioned, the De Benedetto brothers and
Right.
but as far as different locations?
Yeah.
Ooh, I don't think so.
I've never seen one, I was just curious.
Well, the only exception would be the one dairy bottle, William Carmen. And they're hard to find. I came up with one little stash of those, and since then I haven't seen, I've seen one since then.
But when you said producing the bottles, they're not making the
No,
bottles.
but-
Right, yeah. But I mean,
Having
the
product.
Well,
yeah.
Lenin's, that wasn't the Columbia, but Lenin's had a bottle.
Well, I do have a medicinal bottle. It's actually a Cincinnati bottle, but it's got a Lenin label on it.
There
The
was
druggist label?
No, Lenin's, the white, it was sulfur spring, sulfur water, mineral sulfur.
Oh,
mineral.
no, a bottle has
Yeah,
popped up?
the Lenin's. Yeah.
Oh, okay, that I
That
haven't
would be
seen. Yeah.
I was wondering, because they had the White Sulfur Springs there, whether they actually produced.
Yeah, I'd always wondered.
the very manner today.
Labeled bottles that are been
That was the white-
found from the
White Sulfur
Glen
Springs.
that survived?
Not that I'm aware, I mean, nothing that's, you wouldn't have been interested, I wasn't ever that interested. You know, we were just shooting with.
Shooting with the BB guns. Yeah,
So,
actually, where is it?
can't imagine how many thousands of Pico clubs we threw out.
When Richie and I were digging in the foundation,
Yeah.
this one popped out. I added the cord. Yeah, so there were still things popping up out of there even then. Let's see. No, I'm disappointed the mountaintop people didn't come down. I even brought them a Sunset spring water bottle. They're fairly common, but you don't find the paperwork to go with them too often.
That's nice.
And let's see. Oh, here's a tough one to find. John E. Kelly, Leeds, New York, and that was a nice clean one. But I think there are at least 3 different variations of this. And he had a little tavern on Church Street, you know, going out to Athens. And I think he died in the 1880s. So, not too many of his. And here's an oddball, speaking of the mountaintop before. Charles Schumann, pharmacist, Hunter, New York, but it's a citrate of magnesia bottle.
And what did
And
you
you'll
use
see
that for?
tons of citrates, but
Yeah.
you won't find them marked from Hunter.
What is citrate used for?
It's like stomach acid.
Yeah, for that kind of ailment. But yeah, I was with Ed Duncan. I think we were digging up by the, what's that big Washington Irving Inn? Yeah. And he actually dug that, and I dug something else, and we horse traded, and everybody was happy. So, and most of these things that I dug, I mean, I virtually have all of them. I usually don't let anything go that I dig locally. That's why and I hate to be a thorn in the side of so-called fair weather collectors, but they'll do that. They'll build up a collection of something, you know, maybe write a book about it or something, then sell everything off, and then start on something else.
Mhm.
But it's hard for me to walk away from my stuff because it just has a lot of personal connections. So
Is there a book anywhere that talks about the different bottles from Greene County?
oh, glad you mentioned that. I just happen to have a copy handy, signed copy. Fortunately, he's still with us. This was done in '73, but Tom Gentalan, if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. Sorry, Tom, if I messed it up. But I had talked to him a long time ago, and at some point I would love to redo some version of this. And, you know, because at the time they were just going with the information that they had, and they did nice descriptions, a lot of pencil drawings of all different bottles, and they were smart. They went about it the right way. They went by people who were digging them up or what they saw in local shops, and they just kind of described them relative to each other, which one shows up a lot, which one doesn't, and he came up with this neat scale of rarity in the back, the rarity scale pricing method, and I always thought he did a great job with that. And the only thing I would adapt is obviously the numbers have changed, because he's got, you know, some bottles in here that he described as a $30 bottle back in 1971, which now you can add another 0. And then there are others that have turned out to be much more common, and you wouldn't even get his 1971 price. So it's totally flipped, you know, in some cases.
Do you know where the Historical Society could get a copy of that?
Ooh, I'll tell you, if you do enough searches online, once in a while one pops up on eBay.
Okay.
Because I don't think he has anymore. You can check with him directly. He might still have a
What's
few.
the name of it?
He's in the River Basin Sports Shop. That's his business.
And the name of the book?
It's the Rivwinkle Bottle Guide.
Okay.
Yeah. And he kind of fudged it a little bit as far as geography. He would also include things from Hudson, Saugerties, I think even a few Kingston.
But I think he sold that business.
Oh, did he finally? Yeah, okay. And I think his brother did some of
He
the
did, he just
illustrations.
did it this year or something, because he was.
Yeah, I think it was last year.
Yeah.
And then kid bought it.
Yeah. And speaking of books, I brought a few, here we go. One, Cecil Munsey's book, The Illustrated Guide to Collecting Bottles, with an introduction by Charles Gardner, who had a huge historical flask collection. But that is a good basic book on just everything you would want to know about bottle collecting and bottles themselves, without, getting into prices and things like that, but well illustrated, good explanations, and it shows all different types of bottles you could get into. And then Bill Ketchum did a treasury of American bottles, and this one has some wonderful photography, full color, and there's just some beautiful, good early, some of the bitters and the colors that they come in are just gorgeous. That's a good one. And then there are specialized books on all sorts of things. This one's on proprietary medicines and patent bottles, but it's just all line drawings, so not too exciting, but has a lot of information, by Baldwin. And as far as guides, price guides, most of them, I hate to say, aren't worth the paper that they're printed on these days, because things have just changed so much that the old ones are obsolete. This is a Warman's. This is a fairly good one, but again, you'll have so many bottles, you'll be looking and looking, and it's not even listed. They only have a little representative list for every type, because you could fill 20 volumes on all the bottles that people would like to see prices for. So I've found it's much better to use the system that Tom did intuitively, but apply it to your situation. Oh, that's right, I wanted to mention that in the beginning. The formula that our old Economics 101 professor told us about price, price is or equals a measure of scarcity. And in today's world, that involves so many, intricately different things for your situation. I mean, for example, talk about supply and demand. This was gonna be on one of my favorites list, but this is called an RM Megs Albany, and it says pure soda water, and it has this beautifully crude, embossing on it, and just so happens Megs was the first proprietor to have an embossed bottle that said soda water on it in the US, and they're anywhere from 1795 to 1820, and this one is busted, reassembled, and a whole top had to be manufactured for it.
Wow.
That's how rare they are. And I paid a fair amount of money for this one, because there's only 3 of these known that are even this whole. And so if one ever came to market, perfect. And they're all in this beautiful, it's either, I think it's a Stoddard, New Hampshire maker. It would probably, it's gonna go in the thousands, because there have been conversations about that, and that kind of influenced the few of us that have found the 3 that are around, gave us some indication that we should go ahead and pay some money for that. Because if it showed up at the Glassworks auction, now you're definitely talking thousands, but, so everything is so relative, and there's so many different reasons for that. That one's got a lot of things going for it. It's early, it's important, it's from the capital region, and there are a lot of passionate collectors in the Tri-Cities. Isn't that right? Yeah, you probably know Gary Mercer and all those guys.
No, I don't.
No?
I
Okay.
haven't been back in a long time.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I'm hanging out here in the
Oh,
mountains.
yeah, he just called me a few days ago, and we're supposed to get together sometime this spring and dig again. But yeah, it's just, once you're hooked, you're hooked. It's like a lot of things. But, and again, there's just so many, ways you can go about it. Some people love color, some love age, some just, where it's from. It's just a great, and it's a great hobby. It's a small collecting world. A lot of us still get together after all these years. And, in fact, there's supposed to be a bottle club meeting tomorrow night, and I just happen to have brought literature, if anyone's interested, on different bottle clubs. Also, the Bottle Museum up in Ballston Spa. That I would recommend. They're doing a nice job up there. There's their brochure, and worth a little trip. You can have a nice meal up there and make a day of it. All right, and well, if nobody has any other questions, then I guess we'll wrap it up.
Well, thank you very much, Bob. This is Bob Uzillia, Carroll's town historian, as well as the premier bottle collector in the area and digger. And thank you very much.
Thank you.